Welcome to a Parallel Project Training APM Project Management Qualification podcast based on the APM Body of Knowledge 7th edition. You should be using this in conjunction with our e-learning, podcasts, and potentially a tutor-led course. For more information, please visit www.parallelprojecttraining.com.
Hello everybody, welcome to another Parallel Project Training podcast. My name is John Bolton. This is going to be focused on the Body of Knowledge 7th edition, so all new, squeaky clean for 2020. So if you're studying any other qualifications or you're studying Body of Knowledge 6 qualification or anything like that, this is probably not the one for you. This is Body of Knowledge 7 Project Management Qualification podcast. Okay, so I've got with me Paul Neighbour today. Hello, Paul.
John.
Guys, feels like deja vu this. Last did these about 20 years ago. We're going to be talking today about the impact of regulation on projects. It's one of the assessment criteria in the syllabus. We've chosen to do a podcast on this on its own because it is quite a wide reaching assessment criteria, because it includes things like working conditions, risk management, governance and sustainability. Where you see such as in the syllabus, it means that these are things that you could think about, but it's not an exhaustive list and you don't need to know these exact things. But it helps if you do use these as headings, and that's what we're going to do. So we're going to look at things like risk, health and safety, working conditions, sustainability, the environment, and so on. So we've used slightly different headings, but they're all legitimate as far as the listener is concerned. They will vary a lot by geography. So if you're taking this qualification in Saudi Arabia or Argentina, then you may well have interpretations of some of this in your own local territories. And because it says such as, you shouldn't be frightened of using your own examples or your own circumstances in the exam answer, and the markers and the examiners should be fully able to cope with that. Right, so should we take it from the top? It says here, such as the impact on working conditions. Should we start with that one, Paul?
Yeah, and I think actually the point here, they're talking about regulatory and legal requirements. So some of these are regulations and some of these are going to be legislation that you have to follow. So working conditions usually refers to health and safety legislation or regulations, and then working environment conditions, in terms of welfare for workers and employment conditions aspect. So I think around the world, health and safety is generally quite similar. So you need to do a risk assessment, you need to understand what the risks are, you need to make sure that people are trained, they have the right equipment, that they're not doing anything that they shouldn't be doing. So the role of a project manager in that is usually to understand the risks, to do a risk assessment, to make sure there's a health and safety plan in place for the project, to make sure people are properly trained in health and safety, so they've been through some form of site induction when they arrive, that there's some form of review of any health and safety issues, so accident books or hazard logs, that sort of stuff. Oh, and that we use health and safety equipment properly. So we don't use a fire extinguisher to prop open the door and that sort of stuff. Fire doors are in place.
Yeah. I think one of the big things in the UK is not just physical harm; it's stress and distress in the workplace as well. So people have to be kind of on their mettle about that. But working conditions, perhaps it's a really good description of the health and safety bit, but it also covers things like working conditions in terms, you mentioned sort of welfare, so many
access to
many toilets,
lighting,
fresh running water and all that sort of thing. But we're also talking these days about working conditions being things like discrimination and equal opportunities, employment legislation aspects as well, I think. And when you're working in matrix organisations, it can be quite difficult because you don't necessarily understand, how it works for them in the same way it works for you, even down to the sort of working conditions. In some organisations, you fly business class to the United States, in other businesses you don't, it can be quite difficult. And there are some very specific regulations, aren't there, like working time and GDPR.
Yes, that's right. And some of these regulations apply, there might be European legislation, but they apply to customers in Europe. So if you're working with customers, even if you're a US company or a Asian company, you still get caught by the same net.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because I think everyone thinks because of Brexit we don't have to do
anything.
the European Journal procurement anymore.
I noticed you include data protection in the working conditions, GDPR regulations, data privacy.
Yeah, I mean it's arguable, I suppose, but I think it's something that affects, the project manager and the way they do stuff.
Good. And then the other area they've got is sustainability, and this is a growing, huge area for organisations in how to do sustainable projects and reducing carbon impact and doing projects in a way that minimises the impact on the planet, really, and reducing emissions, etc., from waste.
Yeah.
Someone told me that concrete is one of the most CO2 emitting products that you can produce. Yeah, which is just the way it's manufactured.
It's a bizarre thing about offshore wind farms, isn't it? Using concrete bases, because they use it's one of the most CO2 consuming things you can.
Yeah, because I was talking to a group who are civil engineers, and they say, "Oh yeah, all our projects are sustainable." And I go, "Well, what about the concrete?" And they go, "Oh,
oops,
we don't use any." So
Did I mention concrete?
Yeah. And it's going to change the way every project is done in terms of designing projects so that they have, they're energy efficient or fuel efficient or.
But I mean, sustainability is more than just the environment, isn't it? I think we've got the sustainability, you've got the environmental aspects of reuse and recovery of materials and things like that, energy consumptions, but also things like sustainability in terms of workforces and corporate responsibility and where people are, spreading the net a bit wider than just their own business these days.
Yeah.
And
so a lot of those regulations don't come in as legislation. It's a really good example. So they'll have new governance rules introduced by the FTSE, by the corporate bodies, chartered accountants, and so you have to meet those accountancy reporting standards. It's not necessarily a piece of legislation; it's more a regulation or an industry standard that you need to meet.
That's right. And sustainability. I mean, things like affordability. Is it going to be affordable over the long term to run this thing? Are people actually going to use it? Is it something that's just a white elephant? The social context, making sure that we're not ravaging the landscape just to build a new concrete plant.
Then that leads on to environmental legislation. So that's two aspects really. That's not damaging the specific environment in the environment you're working in. So bats, birds, bees, nature. Management of waste, not polluting water courses, all that sort of stuff, And this triangle we've got, in sort of like minimising the amount of material that goes to landfill, reusing it on site where possible, or recycling materials, or preventing waste being generated in the first place.
That's right. I mean, the ideal is prevention, isn't it? I mean, that's why it's at the top of the tree.
Yes.
So if you can prevent waste, that's so much the better. And the last thing you want to do is chuck it in landfill.
Yes. Then governance. I was listening to the radio yesterday, or maybe it was this morning. There was some new rules about governance that were being introduced to companies. So they now have to. It was their carbon impact. So rules that they have to report on their carbon impact. So these things, they all interlap, don't they? Because it's at this. We're going to talk about context later. You've got a new bit of legislation, but that's also a new regulation, also a new, political push. So to splitting them up conveniently, but
governance for project-based organisations is quite important, isn't it? Because if you've got a large company that's essentially doing all its work is simply projects.
Yes,
it's got to have a pretty strong governance over those projects. Because if it doesn't, then the shareholders are all going to go, well, and there was a large company, who I won't name, a couple of years ago, who got criticised quite heavily because they didn't have enough project governance in place, and the shareholders weren't convinced they could deliver their order book. They said, well, actually, you're not, we don't think you're good enough as a company to do this. So all of a sudden, everyone starts running around and doing lots of project management training and writing manuals and things, which was great for us. But,
So I expect the key thing about all this stuff, regulations, is you need to understand it for the industry that you're in and the jurisdiction that you're in, you need to understand what that regulation is, and there'll be industry-specific regulations and country-specific regulations that you and legislation that you have to comply with.
That's right.
And
That's
when
right.
the legislation changes, you need to be aware of what those changes might be and how that might affect
That's right.
your project in the future. So it might be there's some new legislation coming out next year that might change the way you have to deliver.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add to that, Paul, that's a good summary, but I think the only thing I'll just make sure people are aware of is that certainly from the examination perspective, you can get governance at project level as
Yes.
well as governance at
an
organisation level.
Yes.
So the governance at project level is your project management plan, your business case. And so the project manager's got a big role to play in delivering that according to the plan. Because if they deviate from the plan, they're on their own, really. They're not going to get any sympathy if things go wrong, because the sponsor's going to say, well, I thought you were doing it like that. So this whole idea of delegated accountability and responsibility is quite important in terms of governance. If you've been trained in anti-bribery regulations,
Another one.
how are you gonna make sure your team
Yes.
are behaving in the right way?
Yes.
And it's no good saying, well, I've got a system that they have to fill in if they get offered a bribe. It's what are you going to do about it to make sure it doesn't happen again, or how are you going to brief the contractor or whoever it was that tried to make that bribe? So, I think it's useful to just remember the project management plan, governance of the project is one level, governance of multiple projects and organisational governance, and how that impinges on projects is a second level. And don't forget that.
Good.
I think that's it, isn't it?
Quite a broad topic, that one.
Yeah, I was dreading doing this one.
Were you?
Yeah, I don't like this one.
Yeah, well...
No, nobody liked governance. They took it out of the old syllabus. It was BoK7, it had its own section, didn't it?
Yeah.
And now they've sort of smuggled it away as
Yeah.
part of one of the others.
Yeah. And it's trying to be international, so we're trying
We're trying to cover multiple bases.
Yes, multiple countries,
We went
multiple
to
bits of legislation.
we went to Hong Kong with bamboo scaffolding.
Yeah, it's very reliable.
It's very flexible and,
Yes,
and
it's better than steel.
cheap. Yeah. And yet, to our eyes, it looks completely bizarre.
Yes, yeah.
Anyway, there we are.
Brilliant.
See you later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast and found it informative. To find out about our training courses, e-learning, or tutor-led course, please go to www.parallelprojecttraining.com.